Hola, welcome to the Juan de Mariana YouTube channel. And today we have a very special guest with us. He is a renowned writer who has authored roughly 30 books. He is also a PhD both in history and sociology. He is himself a successful businessman who has written extensively about wealth planning. And of course, he is the author of a series of books that we're going to be discussing today, most especially Hitler y el Nationalsozialismo, Hitler's National Socialism. And of course, I'm talking about the man himself, Reiner Zitelmann, the visible arm of capitalism.
Thank you, Jacob.
Welcome to Madrid. It's so great to have you here. And before we speak about the Hitler book, you have just released two books on the Avance publisher here in Spain. The first of them is called 2075. I've translated it, and it's a novel. Please walk us through what the reader may find, because this is your first novel, after all.
Yes, exactly. As you mentioned before, I wrote and edited 29 non-fiction books, and this is the first novel. And it's an anti-egalitarian novel. Maybe I can tell the story in a few sentences. It's 2075, and there's a new movement that starts at the universities. They call themselves Movement for Optical Justice, and their thesis is beauty is unjust. So they say they are beautiful women and they have privileges in life. It's easier to get a partner, but also in profession. This is what they say, and so we should do something against it, because this is against equality. They say we are not against any difference how people look, but the difference should not be too much. Yes, too great. And so they become influential in a party. There are two parties in this 2075, the Rule of Law Party and the Justice Party, and they gain a lot of influence in the Justice Party. And then the Justice Party wins the election, and what happens then is that every year, every woman between 15 and 40 years has to make a scan, her whole body scan and face, and then with artificial intelligence you can calculate how the percentage, how much she applies to the beauty ideal. And if she's too beautiful, more than 95%, then they call her privileged beauty or PP person. And the consequence is, first, they have to pay more taxes, and there are restrictions for university. And if they study at the university, they get the grades that they get are one grade worse. So there are a lot of restrictions. But then, and this is what always happens with totalitarian extreme movement, that they become always more radical, almost more extreme. And this is what happens there. And the next step is that every very beautiful young girl with the age of 15 has to make plastic surgery, but not to make her more beautiful, but to make her a little bit more ugly, so that she looks more like average. And of course, this causes a lot of conflicts. And there is one, the hero of the book is a beautiful young woman, a student, and she has a lot of fear because her sister will turn 15, and she has fear that her sister will get this surgery, and her sister has a lot of fear, and so she starts, going against this movement, and she becomes friends with a journalist, but not a left-leaning journalist, but more someone who thinks like we, like a libertarian journalist, and he starts to make research about who are these people, what do they want, and then the whole book is the fight between this freedom movement on the one hand and this movement for optical justice, and the society turns more and more in a dictatorship step by step.
It is a very interesting book. I suggest you go grab a copy of it. It positions, as Reiner mentioned, as in a dystopia that does not look completely impossible, just like many dystopias that were written before actually turn out to be true. So it's a clear warning against totalitarianism, and it does also introduce the concept of beauty and how we see it in society. There is another book that you just put out also through the Avance publisher in Spanish, which is called The Origins of Wealth and Poverty. And it's essentially, tracks your world tour of freedom of sorts. Can you walk us through how that was? Because many people dream, of traveling around the world. You traveled around the world with a libertarian focus.
Exactly. This was not like a vacation, but this was more like work. And in 20 months, I traveled to 30 countries all over the world. Asian countries, for example, Mongolia, South Korea, Vietnam, and China, a lot of countries in Asia, Nepal. And then in South America, I've been in Argentina, in Colombia, in Paraguay, Uruguay, Chile, Brazil, and of course in the United States and in a lot of European countries. And what I did, I spoke with economists, with ordinary people, with politicians sometimes, with entrepreneurs, to find out why are some countries live in poverty, like Nepal, for example, which is one of the poorest countries in the world, or others make great progress, as, for example, Vietnam in the last decades. And what I did also, before I traveled to these countries, I read a lot of books about the history, because I'm an historian, and I think it's not possible to understand a country if you don't know the history of this country, the economic history especially. And I commissioned a poll in 35 countries all over the world about the image of capitalism and the image of the market economy. And then I mixed all this together, my personal impressions on this journey, the results of the polls, what I know about history, and all this conversations with these politicians, entrepreneurs, ordinary people. And so you learn a lot when you travel. Maybe some people maybe have not the opportunity to go to all these 30 countries, so we'll learn something from the book. But maybe it gives you also an idea, and maybe you say, okay, this sounds interesting, I should go there. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of lessons in that book, so I suggest you also pick it up. And one of the interesting elements here is that it clearly tracks down public opinion and how societies feel about capitalism. So, for example, this book puts you right into the libertarian uprising that Argentina experienced, and also walks you through how Chile sort of became disenchanted with capitalism. Of course, the book includes Spain, so there is a lot of ideas about how Spaniards feel about capitalism, so it is indeed a great read. Today we're going to speak about one of your most popular books, which has finally made the light into Spain and Spanish, so it's also available for the Latin American readers, and it's called Hitler y el Nacionalsocialismo, Hitler's National Socialism. But let's go to the beginning. This was originally your PhD. So how did you approach it? How did you research this topic, and why did you choose it?
Yes, it's a long time ago, and I'm happy that it's now published in a lot of languages all over the world. Last year it was published in Brazil and even in Russia, and it will be published now in Poland and Italy, of course, in English. So it's in a lot of languages now. And what did I do? It's not a biography about Adolf Hitler, but it's about the way he thought. In German we call it Weltanschauung or worldview. Yeah, his ideas, especially about the economy and about social politics, because before I wrote these books, there were some other books, for example, about Hitler's foreign policy ideas, or about his, goal to eliminate the Jewish people, and so there was some research, but not about his economic thoughts and not about his social politics. And how did I do it? I read every speech from Hitler. It was a lot of work to go to all the archives. Today you have this editions, a lot of books, editions with Hitler's speeches, but at this time you had only very few editions, and I had to go all of these historical archives to make photocopies of his speeches. and then to analyze them. But it was not only speeches. Of course, his 2 books. He wrote Mein Kampf, but then there's another book. A lot of people don't know that he wrote 2 books. It's called Hitler's second book, but it was never published. But I analyzed also the book. And then I analyzed diaries, for example, from Joseph Goebbels, who reported about conversations with Adolf Hitler. And then what is also very interesting, very important, there are so-called table talks from Adolf Hitler, monologues in the Führer headquarters. It was this way. Hitler went very late to bed every night, like maybe until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. He sat there with sometimes only his assistants and some people from party and friend, and they were all around the table in the night, and he spoke and spoke and spoke.
He rumbled.
Yes, about everything, about politics, about history, about women, about religion, about military questions, about everything. And why is this important? Because fortunately someone made some notes about this so that we know what he was talking about. And it is important because if you analyze his speeches, of course, you have always to keep in mind what is propaganda. He spoke different, for example, like every politician, if he spoke to workers or if he spoke to entrepreneurs, for example, or to peasants. And this is not different from all politicians who adapt to their audience. And of course, a lot is propaganda, and you have to distinguish what is his real opinion about things and what is only propaganda. And I developed a way to analyze and distinguish. And the first thing is to compare what he said in his speeches and his book on the one hand, and in his inner circle, like this monologue that we headquarters on the other hand. Then you see sometimes it's the same, and sometimes it's quite different. Only one example. Of course, he was in war with the Soviet Union and Stalin, and he had this propaganda against this Jewish Bolshevism. But you see, when you read his table talks and if you read the diaries of other people, that from the beginning of the 40s, he didn't believe in his own propaganda about Bolshevism as a tool from Jewish people, because he thought Stalin went against the Jews, what he appreciated, of course, and for him, Stalin, he really admired him.
Yeah, that's one of the takeaways from the book.
Especially this planned economy. Yes, and if someone criticized Stalin in his inner circle, so no, he always defended him. And I have here, for example, one quote, what he said in July 1942. He said, one has to have unqualified respect for Stalin. In his way, the guy is quite a genius. His ideals, such as Genghis Khan and so forth, he knows very well, and his economic planning is so all-encompassing that it is only exceeded by our own 4-year plan. I have no doubts whatsoever that there have been no unemployment in the USSR as opposed to capitalist countries such as the United States. So you see, there are a lot of quotes that he was very positive about Stalin, but of course in his propaganda, he was in war with him and was an enemy, you didn't find it. So it's always important to compare what for example, you find always also in the diaries of Joseph Goebbels, who wrote every day something about his conversations with Hitler, and then to compare it with his speeches. And another thing is that his worldview was in itself consistent. It was not moral, of course, in no way, but it was logical and consistent in itself. And you have always to check when you analyze a part, what he says, is it consistent with his other thoughts? Because this is something, that will surprise people maybe. After the war, especially in Germany, there was a picture of Adolf Hitler as a totally maybe fool and crazy or stupid, always shouting so you know his speeches when you saw him really. But from 2 hours, this was maybe only 2 minutes. And in the rest, he had a lot of arguments even about the economy and so on, and some even complicated theories about economic development. And some people think that a criminal, and of course Hitler was a mass murderer and in this way criminal, that he's also stupid. But of course it's crazy. Not every criminal is stupid. The criminals who are stupid are not dangerous. Dangerous are the criminals who are very intelligent, and Hitler was very intelligent. And this was so. Some people were surprised. You translated the book, and I don't know what was your feeling when you read. A lot of people were surprised. Oh, he knew a lot about things, and it was much more consistent in himself. I don't know what was your feeling when you read.
Yes, indeed. Well, you find out a lot of things, and a lot of it gives you a very nuanced view of different elements of his thought. One of the areas of your research that I found more interesting is what has traditionally been described as the Lebensraum, the special and natural area that was meant to be German for the Reich. And you make an economic explanation. You make the case that, in his view, that area, that conquer of these different areas was essentially to create a larger internal market. And he also had this view of the US as a very modernist economy, which was partially able to succeed because it had a larger internal market. So could you develop a bit of that?
Yes, and even there was a theory behind it, and his theory was, it was not his own theory, but of course he read it in the books, that due to the development of countries, what we call the third world, like in Africa or Latin America, if they develop more and more, that the markets will shrink for capitalist countries. And he was against colonialism, for example. He criticized he didn't want to have what the British did, for example, but he thought that what he called Lebensraum, like living space, that it should be something comparable to the United States with resources and energy and all this. And so before I analyzed these things, people thought that he wanted to realize in the East, in Russia, a kind of like anti-modern agrarian utopia with all peasants and so. But this was not the case. He was in his way very modern in a way. He admired very much the United States, not for their economic system, of course. He hated
industrialism, the cars.
Exactly, with the cars and Henry Ford and all this. And he admired it very much. And he wanted to be similar. And so this was the economic reason, what he said, to conquer new living space for Germany in the East.
These days, when far left and far right parties appear, their leaders on the moderate space of the right and the left do not know exactly how to deal with them, and the own leaders of these new movements have a difficult time adjusting to the reality of politics, where you have to reach agreements and create coalitions. Back in the day, when we read this book, we see how dismissive Hitler was of the old guard, of everything that was to the right of the left, and in fact, he was quite more of the revolutionary, so although he opposited those on the far left, he did kind of admire them and respect them more than those that were more moderate on the conservative side.
Yes, this has something to do with his general worldview. You know, he was a socio-Darwinist. It means for him, if you understand how he thought, the whole world was weak and strong. Who is weak and who is strong? And for him, the bourgeoisie was very weak. He laughed at them. He didn't take them serious because they are tolerant, and for him, people being tolerant are weak people. And when he wanted to praise someone, for example, if he wanted to praise you, he would say he was a real fanatic. You know, what is for us maybe a bad word. Fanatic was for him the highest praise. He said, oh, he was a real fanatic. And he saw these people, especially on the left, so like in the communist parties. And these were the people he wanted to attract with his movement. And he thought they are really strong, the communists and Stalin and so, and the others, this is the weak bourgeoisie. And So you can understand it due to his socio-Darwinist worldview. So for him, the explanation, some people say it's wrong to say that Hitler was not far right because he went so much more against the left, against the Social Democrats, against the communists, as opposed against conservative forces. It is true in a way, but first, at the end of his life, was the most thing he regretted. He said, I should have done it like Stalin, for example, who killed a lot of his officers and generals, and he saw the communists as real competitors. So it was like a competition.
He was tough on them because they were competition.
Yes,
they were.
Yes. Who will be successful in fighting against the capitalist system? I have here one more quote. For example, at the end of his life in 1944, he met with the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, and he said, capitalism had run its course. The nations were no longer willing to stand for it. The victors to survive would be fascism and National Socialism, maybe Bolshevism in the East. So this is where his forget capitalism, forget liberal ideas. They have run their course. This is the future: fascism, nationalism, and maybe Bolshevism, because they are the strong.
Which again brings us to his complete despise for the bourgeoisie, for the establishment, and his role as kind of a revolutionary of sorts. The book is 700 pages long, and it's very thoroughly researched, and it is full of the Führer's own comments on the economy. So some on the libertarian and classical liberal space have positioned him as a socialist. I think that view is also a bit simplistic. He was definitely anti-capitalist. So the book is 700 pages long. It's very thoroughly researched. But some on our side, so to speak, classical liberals, libertarians, conservatives, have sometimes learned about some spare quotes from the Führer, and they have argued that he is a socialist. I think the reality is a bit more nuanced than that. He had a view of the economy that was indeed not consistent with what we understand as laissez-faire capitalism. But for instance, he was not willing to suppress private property, but rather to submit private property to his wills. And out of the different passages of the book, one of those that caught my attention the most is one speech he gave to a group of businessmen and entrepreneurs and a confederation of industries, where he was essentially telling them, we're going to be good as long as you do what we tell you to do.
Yes, this is exactly very important. Is that his philosophy is he will tell the entrepreneurs you have to do this and that and that, and if you do it, I'm fine with this. It's okay. But if you don't do it, we tell you that you have to do it, or we do it by ourselves, by the state. This was his philosophy, and so the question is very often discussed: was Hitler a socialist? It depends how you defend socialism. Of course, he was not a communist, not a Marxist, because Marxism means nationalization of all means of production. And he was against nationalization of all means of production. He nationalized something, and he used it always as a threat to force people to do it. But as a social Darwinist, he thought if we nationalize everything, there's no more competition. So this was his concern. So this was the reason why he was against nationalizing everything. But this doesn't mean that he was for free market capitalism. On the other hand, he was, in my view, I call him a modern socialist, because I distinguish between classical socialism, it means nationalization of all means of production, and modern socialism, you are the owner, but the owner maybe only in a legal form, because in reality you cannot decide what to do with your property, but the state will do it. And behind it is a philosophy. It's very important to understand. For me, Adolf Hitler is exactly the opposite to Adam Smith. I think a lot of people who listen to us know his Adam Smith's book, Wealth of Nations, and his thesis that when people go to their individual interests, that in the end it's also good for the common interest. So this was Adam Smith's philosophy. And I want to read something from you, from Hitler, what is exactly, it sounds like the anti-Adam Smith. So his philosophy. He said, in all of business and in all of life, in fact, we will have to do away with the concept that the benefit to the individual is what is most important, and that from the self-interest of the individual, the benefit of the whole is built up. Therefore, that it is the benefit to the individual which only makes up the benefit of the community at all. The opposite is true. The benefit to the community determines the benefit to the individual. The profit of the individual is only weighed out from the profit of the community. If this principle is not accepted, then an egoism must necessarily develop which will destroy the community. And so, you know, it's this collectivistic thought. For example, they had one slogan in the party program of the National Socialists. It's Gemeinwohl vor Eigenwohl. It means common good before individual good. Or in the Hitler Youth, the youth organization, they had a slogan, it's Du bist nichts, dein Volk ist alles. It means you are nothing, but your people is everything. So this is the way he thought for the economy. And I think this, you know, to emphasize the we and against the I, this is what they have in common with a lot of modern left wing. They always think about we have to we, and every individualism is suspicious for them. And so he's the exactly opposite. And so in this way, it's totally wrong to say he was like pro-capitalism or pro-free market economy. But on the other hand, he was not a traditional Marxist socialist. So he was something in between. And this was also his own philosophy. He said always, I'm against the extreme left, I'm against the extreme right. But of course, he was not like moderate in the middle, but he said, I want to establish an extreme against both of these extremes. Maybe he took the worst of both extremism and put it together. And for him, nationalism and socialism was the same. He meant nationalism is the subordination from individual interest under the collective. And socialism is the same. And so his thesis was, in the end, nationalism and socialism is exactly the same thing.
That is a very interesting take. And I think it is become apparent with time that many of his ideas have actually been developed by those on the left. You yourself are a successful businessman that has done significant work on the real estate work, in the real estate world, and as you know, the private property in real estate is more or less universally accepted. But what can you do with that private property if you have rent controls, taxes, limits on the type of contracts that you can do, building regulations that do not allow you to build? So in a way, I think that what Hitler was putting forward when he was making these claims is more or less what the modern left is still doing today.
Exactly. I'll give you a funny example. Hitler, to his birthday, he gave a present to his people. And this present was like a rent break, so that it was not allowed to increase rents anymore for landlords. And he gave it as a present to his people. It was a law. And after the end of the Second World War, first it was also in effect in Germany, but then Ludwig Erhard and his people abolished this and they gave free. But in the East Germany, GDR, they had exactly the same law as it was in Adolf Hitler's time. And they had it until the end of the GDR. And it was forbidden to increase rents, and the result was that rents were very low, but 40% of the buildings were severely damaged. There's 10% you couldn't live there. And for example, in 1989, 26% of the apartments had not their own toilet. You had to share it with other people. This was 1989. And this was the result of this. And after reunification, we had to invest from the West 80 billion euros for modernization and building new homes because it was a total disaster. But the origins were in National Socialism. And now the crazy thing is that today in my country, in Germany, we have a far left party, Die Linke, and they want exactly the same again. What failed so several times. And we had a referendum in Berlin few years ago, and 56% voted for nationalization of big housing companies. So the ideas survive always today with a far left, but they have some origins there in Hitler's time.
Exactly. Well, the book is just amazing. I encourage you to pick up a copy. As we mentioned, its name is Hitler y el Nacionalsocialismo. Of course, this was originally a PhD dissertation, but it has been upgraded, expanded, and enlarged. So the result is an amazing piece of research. And before we close this discussion on the book, I would like to get some final thoughts on if you would like to address that audience that I'm sure it's eager to pick up a copy.
Maybe you can, yeah. I'm very proud about something. So here you have this quote,
yes.
But maybe you don't know who he was, but I will tell
Clemens
you.
von Klemperer.
He was Jewish, yes.
Mm-hmm.
He was a part of the resistance against Hitler, and then he had to leave Vienna, immigration. So because some people from the left criticize it's too positive about Hitler. Of course, it's not positive, but I think this quote, maybe you can read it in Spanish now for people.
I will.
I'm very proud about it because he was Jewish and he escaped, and he's one of the most renowned historians who did research about resistance against Hitler in the Third Reich.
So, of course, we're speaking about Professor Clemens von Klemperer, who wrote the following about Dr. Zitelmann's book. Se han escrito muchas biografías sobre Adolf Hitler, pero el libro de Rainer Zitelmann no es simplemente otra más. Ha tenido el rigor de recopilar y evaluar todas las declaraciones y escritos de Hitler, y con ello ha despejado el camino para una comprensión más completa de la autoimagen de Hitler, la naturaleza de su ideología, sus objetivos y sus políticas. Rainer Zitelmann ha decidido abstenerse de emitir juicios morales, pero su minucioso y responsable trabajo académico habla por sí solo con aún más fuerza. Su libro constituye un hito en nuestra comprensión de Adolf Hitler, which, again, because some people will be listening in English, it's essentially a paragraph in which Professor Clemens von Klemperer states that many biographies have been written about Adolf Hitler. Few or none have had as much rigor when putting together all these statements and writings from Hitler and creating a total 360-degree view of his ideology, objectives, goals, and policies. So
yes, and one thing that he mentioned, what is also very important, that I reject that I have no moral judgments in my book, but he says what I do speaks all the louder in moral sense. So, and this was for some people a little bit confusing because they expect...
Because if you don't call Hitler a monster in every page, then it doesn't make sense.
Every page...
This is obvious.
He was a criminal monster. I think it's obvious.
Yeah.
Everyone, I don't have to repeat it.
It's in the beginning of the book.
Yes,
you make a clear...
And I think people don't want to have my judgment and what they even know before, but they only want to be informed how he thought. And I treat him like every other subject in history, as a scientist, as a researcher. And this was, in a way, a new approach that provoked, of course, some people.
Yeah, well, like I said, very interesting piece of work. And before we close our discussion here today, I just want to get your thoughts on the current evolution of Argentina under President Milei. I know you have been traveling to Argentina, you have been in events with President Milei, and as you know, his first year and a half has been very successful in terms of economics. He's dealing with political turmoil and some more problems lately, but a big legislative election is coming. So what's your take on the turnaround of the economy in Argentina, and also the situation that Milei will be going into before this election, in which, of course, the Peronists are going very hard against him, and he has to fight that fight if he wants to have an actual block of legislators who can push forward his agenda?
Yes, first of all, I learned about Milei was because I have this, Google alert where you say pop up your name, and then I saw an interview with someone, Javier Milei. I haven't heard his name before. It was in Spanish, but with Google Translate I could understand it. And they asked him, what will you do this afternoon? And he said, I will go home and go on reading book from Reinhard Zittelmann, Capitalism is not the problem, but the solution.
El capitalismo no es el problema, es la solución. Yes. Also available at...
And I was very happy. Oh, there's someone, I didn't hear his name, in Argentina, and he likes my book, so I like him. So this was my first approach. And then I was there in Argentina in 2022, 23, 24 every year, and thought and studied his movement and what's the difference, why was his movement much more successful than other libertarian movements in the world. But I expected one thing, and I was a little bit surprised. And this is very important now for the development right now. I expected that there will be two very, very hard years when he will start his reform, where things will not become better but worse. Why did I expect it? Because this was a lesson that I learned, for example, from Maggie Thatcher. She has a lot in common with, by the way, on October 13th, it's her 100th birthday, and I admire her very much. For me, the best politician in Europe in the last century. And it was with her. She started with this economic reforms, privatization, lowering taxes, deregulation, and she believed in the teachings of Hayek. So a lot of common with Milei. Of course, she was not an economist as Milei, but she believed in the same values. And things first became worse for 2 years. And the same with Balcerowicz in Poland, who also, he's a colleague from Javier Milei, professor for economics, and he believes in Hayek, Mises, and the same thing. And he started his reforms, and first 2 years negative GDP and all this, and then things became better. And a little bit similar also in the time from Reagan when he started with his reforms and so.
So there was a recession in 1981.
Yes, and what I expected that first things will become worse and then it will become better. And I was a little bit skeptical. My question, I had always the same question for all people in Argentina. Will people be patient enough with Javier Milei? Will they be patient if 2 years, they vote for him, they hope? Of course, he said before the elections it will take a long time, years I can promise, even it will take, it spoke about 12 years to fix everything, but will people in Argentina be patient? This was my concern. And what happened then? First, what I expected happened exactly. The number of people living in poverty increased from I think 30% to 40% to 50%, and some things became worse. This is exactly what I expected because I knew this other experience. But what I did not expect, that it was very, very fast that things became better than
the turnaround was very quick.
It was very fast, much faster than I expected.
6 months,
to be honest. But even then, when people asked me, I said, please wait a bit. I believe absolutely what he does is 100% correct, but don't think that it's all done now. There will be more difficulties he has to go through. And this was the reason why I had lectures in 2024 in Argentina with my book, How Nations Escape Poverty. And I told them about Poland. I told these people in Argentina the graphics, how things became worse and then it became better. And it was always my same story. Be patient with Milei because he cannot turn things that went wrong for decades and decades and decades because of statist and Peronist politics. There's not a mirror. But so things became better very fast. Now it's again difficult, and my message is still the same for people in Argentina. Be patient, and I hope he will be able to explain people it's not possible to fix things in 1 or 2 years that went wrong about decades and decades and decades. And the question is the same that I asked 2 or 3 years ago. Will people in Argentina be patient? If they are, I think it will be a great future for them. If they are not, I'm sure they will go back to the same what happened before. And this is the real alternative. And of course, for the libertarian movement all over the world, it's interesting. You remember what happened first after Milei came to power, and when the number of people living in poverty increased, all the leftists, you see, it doesn't work. He caused poverty. Even our chancellor now in Germany, Merz, who's called more conservative, he treats people so bad and brings them to poverty. Absolutely crazy, yes. Not only leftists, a lot of people thought. And then, when there was a success, the inflation came down from 25% for the month to 2%, and so then they were silent. So you could hear nothing about Milei. And now, when things become difficult, they are allowed. So, and if it would fail, and of course, there's no guarantee. He has not the majority in the parliament, and a lot will depend on the elections. And there's no guarantee for a happy ending when people are not patient enough. And of course, then it would be a disaster, not only for Argentina, but for the whole libertarian movement in the world. Mm-hmm. Because we cannot say, like left people, they failed 24 times in Cuba, in North Korea, in China, in East Germany, in the Soviet Union, in Bulgaria, in Albania, in Vietnam. It failed every time. But for them it's easy. They say, okay, this wasn't true socialism, next time it will work. But if we will do the same, it will be ridiculous. This was not true libertarian, but next time it will work. So it would be really difficult for us to explain. So I hope so much that he will be successful.
I can't resist to ask a final question. Some quick comments about Germany, because you did bring up the Chancellor. How's your country doing after very bad energy policy for so long? Not a lot of economic reforms under Angela Merkel. The big problem with migration. Some quick comments about Germany right now.
Yes, we are in a very bad situation. We are again the sick man of Europe, as we had been in the beginning of the 2000s. But then we had economic reforms with a social democrat at this time. He lowered taxes from 53% to 42% this time. A lot of deregulation in the labor market. A little bit like a little Maggie Thatcher.
Gerhard Schröder,
who I hate even today because he's on Putin's side. Yeah. But I have to accept it was great what he has done at this time. But so Angela Merkel, you mentioned it, did absolutely nothing, not a single reform. On the opposite, she started to reconstruct the German energy industry, to put it in the direction of a planned economy. They phased out nuclear power plants, and they started to phase out coal power plants. They put fracking. They wanted to do all with gas and windmills, what of course did not work. And all with the pretext of climate change. They spent so much as no nation in the world, hundreds and hundreds of billions. And if someone mentioned, okay, but our share on CO2 emissions worldwide is only 2%, so even if we would be totally neutral with CO2, it wouldn't change the climate. Yeah. Then the answer from them was, yes, but we are the role models for the rest of the world. Everyone will watch as us and follow our way. Now I think everyone is watching Germany, but no one will follow, because this is for them more like a nightmare. They see there's a recession and it fails totally. And the problem is, I think, in a way, Merz is not stupid. He knows in a way that it's wrong, but he has the same mistake as a lot of conservative politicians. This is the difference to Thatcher and to Milei. No compromise with the left. Don't give them an inch, yes, as Milei said, or Thatcher said. Don't give them an inch. No, it's Merz, okay, he made this coalition with Social Democrats, and he can't do things that even in his own party, there are these people who believe more in this Merkel politics. And so, and the thing is now that things will not become better in Germany. So I'm pessimistic. And when the last government came to an end, there were a lot of people optimistic. Oh, Merz will move it. And I wrote a big article with the headline, nothing will change. It will go on the way before. And people criticized me. Oh, what? This is too pessimistic. No. And now, unfortunately, I was right so far, because maybe they go the wrong way a little bit slower. But even if it's the wrong way, they believe, again, in this what they called energy turnaround, or then, you know, this crazy idea from Brussels to forbid the ban for registration of cars with combustion engines. I think this never happened before in history, that a country voluntarily forbid his best product. So, because we were proud in Germany for our BMW, Mercedes, and Volkswagen and all this. And now it's all electric, but of course the Chinese can produce it much cheaper and much better. And in the end, I think for them, they are happy about it. How crazy!
We are committing suicide.
This job, we commit suicide, and this is really so. I'm not too optimistic, and the problem is we have now, as a result, the strongest party in some polls, but at least number 2 is the AfD. And the AfD, I think, had a similar development as Fox Party in your country. They started with people believing in free market when they were founded 10 years ago. But from the 16 founders of AfD, only 3 are still in the party. The other 13 left the party. And these were more the free market people. And then far right-wing people came in the party. And there are still some people who believe in market economy in the party, but they became less and less and less. And especially what I don't like with this party, it's that they are like pro-Russian and anti-Ukraine, like a lot of other right-wing parties. So this is also, for me, in my political view, not an alternative, this party.
So, as always, it is a pleasure to welcome Rainer Zitelmann to Madrid. Make sure to get yourself a copy of these 3 books that have just come out. It's 3 of them, but all of them are worth it. You've got the novel, 2075, the year in which beauty was forbidden, 2075, el año en que la belleza se convirtió en delito. You've got The Origins of Wealth and Poverty, Los Orígenes de la Riqueza y la Pobreza. Both of them are available on at the Avance publisher. And Unión Editorial has released Hitler's National Socialism, Hitler y el Nacionalsocialismo, which is perhaps one of Rainer's most well-known works. So, as always, pleasure to have you in Madrid.
Thanks a lot, my friend.
And
yes.
Make sure to follow the Instituto Juan de Mariana in all of our social media channels for future interviews and content, always with the ideas of freedom in mind. Thank you very much for joining us. Muchas gracias.